and we only have 3/4 of an hour. So this is, thank you for coming to this session on coaching and feedback and why learners need both. And it's, as Angela said, she's lurking in the background and can help us if we need her. And it's really, we're really trying out a different format. I've got more slides probably than I can share, but that's okay. Like, we're looking at this as extending over 2 sessions, today and then 2 weeks from today on the 19th. And so we'll just see how it goes. It's a bit of an experiment, so thank you. Now, let me see. Okay, so just to start us off, just to tell you, first of all, tell you a little bit about me. I'm a medical education researcher. I started my career as a nurse years ago, and then my research interests now are medical education, and especially assessment and feedback. And so hence a request for me to be part of this or lead this session. So this is just a scenario I'm going to put up just to sort of get people thinking about feedback. So just read through it, and whether it's in an LIC, it might not be quite as realistic, but just do pretend that it is a realistic situation. And if you just want to take a minute, you can type a response, or if you want to add. This is going to be an interactive session, at least to a certain extent. Do you have an emotional reaction when you hear something like this? Yes, no? That often people do. You can type in the chat if you want to type rather than speaking up. And if you don't want to sort of share your thoughts, that's okay. I'm just trying to encourage you to think about this. And then think about, what kind of feedback you'd want to provide to Sam, and then to move on to the next stage, like how would you coach them? How would you coach him or her to improve? That's what we're going to be working on. So to start off, a way to sort of think about the difference between feedback and coaching, and I can't take credit for this slide. One of my research colleagues developed it, and I just think it's dynamite. I really think she's done a great job of showing how the two are interconnected, yet how they're different. So that feedback really cultivates insight into your current performance, whereas coaching promotes improved future performance. And some people, just do this naturally when they're giving feedback. They naturally move into that coaching phase. But from our research, we've learned that, coaching doesn't come naturally to medical educators and clinicians, that we're better at perhaps telling people what to do rather than trying to coach them through it. Something to remember about both, if you look at that little circle down at the bottom that I added, that what's really important is that both engage the learner. So it's not something you're doing to the learner, it's something you engage the learner and doing with them, seeking their views, that they're both conversations, and trying to seek consensus. And we'll work through this a little bit more. And up at the top there, I've put a little circle, think for coaching, think of sports coaches, like thinking if you're learning to play golf or tennis or whatever, that you need to be observed by your coach, and you need to get that really specific feedback that's going to help you get to the next level, that's going to help you improve your swing or improve your body posture, whatever it is that you need to be better. And so that's an image that I try and encourage folks to keep in their mind when they're thinking about the differences between coaching. So my objectives, and as I say, this is over 2 sessions. We're going to compare the two a little bit. We're going to talk about a model for helping both provide the feedback and then moving into the coaching. Some of you may have seen this, the R2C2 model. There may not be time today, but I would hope in the next session we might be able to actually practice using some of the phrases. I'll give you some of the phrases that can be used now, as what I've heard from, great clinicians. They say, I know I should be saying something, but I don't know what I should say. So we've tried to provide some of those phrases. And then if there's an opportunity either this time or next to talk about, might this work for you? What might get in the way and so forth. And how can we change the culture of feedback? I want to say a bit about the resources that we're providing for the 2 sessions. We've put together 10 tips for feedback and coaching. That will be on the FactDev website. The slides will be on the website. We're developing some short demo videos of different components of feedback. They'll be available. And then I provide the R2C2 website, in which we have like brochures like this. They're a trifold that open up, and for each of the 4 phases provide some phrases that you can use. Those are on the website, and some videos there as well. So those are resources for you. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I'm supposed to be saying. The chat, please use the chat if you want to ask anything, and I'll try and keep an eye on it, and Angela will help me too. And there's an evaluation there at the end, which I'm sure Angela will remind you about at the end of it all. So when you're thinking about feedback, first of all, talk a bit about feedback. What are some of your challenges in providing feedback? And if this is something, if you want to type something quickly in the chat, or if you just want to put it in your head, just take a minute and think about it, or write something. I'll have a sip.
I think sometimes, Joan, there can be some time restraint. Sometimes there's not a lot of time in a busy day to give feedback, so that would immediately come to mind.
Yeah, that's Mike. That's a really good point. That trying to find that time, and maybe some of the rest of you have some, might have some tips for how you do it. Whether you try and schedule it in at the end of the day, or when, or for the end of the week, or whenever you can. Yeah, for sure. No, that was. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm just not sure if those are chats. Oops. Coaching feedback. We all struggle to offer constructive and critical feedback. Right. So so on that note too, I'll move on to my next slide. So these are challenges that, I've either experienced myself and continue to experience, because it's an ever-going struggle, isn't it? And then I've heard colleagues talk about, like, we don't want to appear too critical. We don't want to evoke that emotional reaction. We don't want to threaten our, the working, learning relationships we have with our learners. Some say, that it's, I find this just so disheartening that sometimes those faculty, those preceptors who give really good constructive feedback are the ones who maybe end up getting a bad teacher evaluation. Casey, I like the way you've put that. You need to get comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And that's, so other challenges are feeling anxious, not knowing what to say, not knowing how to say it in a positive manner. So I'm going to move on, and certainly the practical side of finding time as well. But I'm going to move on a little bit and hopefully address some of these sort of, emotional kinds of responses too, because I think, feedback sessions on faculty development and feedback have really focused on, the skill, that this is what you do, the technique. However, what we often realize, and what you're bringing out, is there is an emotional side to it. And these are this is a quote that a colleague shared with me, someone on our research team, like, giving research is like breaking bad news, was his observation. And then another one said, you have a supervisor who doesn't want to give feedback and a learner who doesn't want to get it. Is there any wonder, if we don't succeed? So I think that we've just sort of overlooked that there is that emotional component to it, and that's what makes it difficult at times. And we'll try and work on that a little bit. So to help to understand that a little bit more, I've listed here again because of our time. We don't have heaps of time, but I've listed some of the characteristics of effective feedback rather than asking you to identify them. So that, the first one is, and sometimes we forget this, that it's really supposed to be data, like that coach that's watching you improve your swing or whatever. He or she observes how you're swinging, and that is the performance data, that you're not holding your elbow right, or your wrist isn't bent the right way, or whatever that may be. It's not about assumptions or judgment. So you wouldn't think that a tennis coach would say, well, you're not holding your arm the right way. that's not helpful enough. It has to be, more specific than that on the observed behavior, and very, very specific that you're not holding your wrist, the angle should be at, 45 degrees, not 90 degrees, whatever. So that keeping it really specific. Timely, like I think these are the kinds of things that we've all learned about feedback. It's about behavior that can be changed. So what a learner is doing, something that they can improve on. That's something that they can change, and not a personality trait. So I'm just trying to think of an example of that, so that that I observed when you were talking to Mrs. Smith, that you didn't make eye contact and you were very short and cryptic in your comments. That gives much more information. It's much more data than saying that, well, you were curt and rude, which is sort of taking it to the assumption part of it, and doesn't give those specifics that somebody can work on. The idea that it's related to a standard or a competency level, that I know in residency education, it's now being based more on competency-based education, and each of the the competencies, the major roles in for physicians through the Royal College, and for family medicine as well, have different competencies levels. So for communicator, for collaborator, etc. And I'm understanding too that for undergrad, that competencies are now being developed for students, at least what needs to be attained by the end of the program. And so I think it's easier for students and residents to receive that feedback if they can, see how it relates to that competency level. I'm sure I frequently hear, and I'm sure that you may hear as well, that that students just relate their feedback to, or they hear feedback related to how that particular preceptor or faculty person wants something done. So talking with someone in OB/GYN a few days ago, is that a resident was saying, well, I know Dr. S likes it done like this, and Dr. Y likes to do it like that. And then when I go on a new rotation with someone else, I have to figure out how they like it. So that, that makes it, really challenging. It's not really relating it to a standard or a competency level. But it's been the way, how can we change that culture? How can we focus more on those competency levels? The third one from the bottom, like seeking the learner's views, that it, like really engaging them, thinking about it as a conversation, so that you're hearing their side of the story and what their self-assessment is and what they think's going on. And by doing that, you also demonstrate interest in them as a learner, because I think, as we all know, that, feedback is a communication skill. For effective communication, we need relationships. And so having relationships. And this is why I think you folks in the LICs, I can imagine that it can be a really, positive relationship, that having a long time to develop that relationship with your learners, and they're being in the community for a long time, so that they're able to develop relationships with your colleagues as well. And I would hope that makes it easier to engage in effective feedback conversation. So demonstrating interest in some of the research that we've done, learners, these have been residents primarily, have told us that, the preceptor who shows that interest in me and who I know is really interested in my getting better, who really wants me to do a good job, it's much easier to take feedback from someone like that than someone who doesn't seem to be interested in me or may not really have observed me. So that is a key component. And then it moves into this coaching piece, that it's not just giving feedback, but it's moving into how to do it, how to improve. And I'll talk about that a little bit more too. So I'm sure you've heard this as well, and you may have experienced it in your own training, is the being told that the feedback is, well, you've got a great personality. You need to read a little bit more and study a bit more around the cases. That sort of doesn't give very much, doesn't give anything specific to work on. So trying to make it more specific. So, and the reason why these, why are these characteristics so important and why do they work? It sort of ties into that emotion discussion that we had at the beginning. And so in this slide, it's a little bit complex, but it's really about the guys and gals who have studied the psychology of how we see ourselves and feedback. And if you think about it, we have 3 levels that we as individuals, each of us as an individual, has 3 levels of performance goal, like, for ourselves. And it's how we see ourselves, performing generally, as a parent, as a spouse, as a doctor, for me as an educator, as a researcher, family member, community member, whatever, like we have that vision of how we see ourselves. And I think in medicine, it's, the pressure is to be at a very high level. And so we want to maintain that. So that's the sort of the top level of the pyramid, so to speak. Then the next level is the task level, like how we perform a specific task. And generally that's where the feedback should be going, at that task level. And then task learning is more the specifics about how we learn something. So learning, how to suture properly, learning how to break bad news properly, all those specific little bits that are involved. And so the challenge is to direct the feedback at the task level, to guide improvement, and not at the self level. Because and I think we all do it. I know I do it. When I'm receiving feedback or I get an evaluation that I'm, on a presentation that sort of surprises me, and I thought I did better than that. I thought I was a better educator than that we sort of ramp it up to that self level, instead of, keeping it in perspective that, well, Joan, in that particular presentation, you talked too quickly, you didn't explain something well enough, instead of keeping it at that task level. It's just how we're hardwired as professionals. And so a challenge is to provide feedback in a way that doesn't threaten the self, like doesn't threaten somebody's self-esteem, but informs them about how to improve that task. So it tries to keep it at the task level. And so, how to do that, again, it's by observing, it's by being really specific. So I'm going to observe you doing your suturing, I'm going to observe you taking a history, whatever. And then coach, which is a focus on getting better, which really, brings in the positive. So hopefully that description sort of makes sense, first off, about how we receive feedback and how easy it is for us all to sort of take, especially critical feedback. But we also do it with good feedback, don't we? That if we say, well, Joan, that was a good presentation, it was clear, and so on and so forth, and oh, well, I'm a good educator. Whereas it's just feedback on that particular task or that particular presentation. it's very difficult for us as professionals to separate out the task and ourself. And that's one of the challenges in giving feedback, and especially when it's negative feedback, because it makes us feel badly as a professional that we're not doing our job and that we're not living up to standards. So how to frame it in a way, and it can be done so that it does focus on the task. And the way to do it is by observing, being specific, and then the coaching. So we'll move. So now I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about more specifically about the coaching. And so I just want you to think for a minute, like how many of you have coaches or your children have coaches? So is this something that you're familiar with? Yes, no? And so if you look at this picture here, this is a golf coach on the left, and a trainee, a golf trainee on the right. And so you can see, so that image of sports coaches, that what they do is they observe and they make really specific observations about how the hands are held, how the elbows are held, where the feet are, the knees, how bent they are, and all those kinds of things. And so the feedback then is that I observed you, that your knees were, may have been bent, a little bit too much, whatever. At a particular degree, I don't know, I'm not a golf player. And then how they use that feedback, how they use that data, then to move on to the coaching. And again, thinking about it, it's very objective. It's not subjective, it's objective. It's what's observed. So that's what helps to remove some of the emotion from it. So this slide talks a bit more about that difference between coaching and this notion of we sort of have tied. Isn't it interesting that we've tied assessment and feedback together in medical education, perhaps more so than in other professions, as though and feedback and it all goes with evaluation, whereas it should be really about feedback and learning. Like feedback is to help people learn and to get better. So, and again, that puts it in a positive light. I love this quote at the top of the slide: coaching enables you to learn and improve and helps you play at a higher level. And it's from this article by Heenan Stone in 2014. And to me, that it's just such a positive statement. And so even sharing that with our learners and starting to share phrases like, I'm here to coach you. I'm here to help you get better. I want to help you to learn and improve and help you play at a higher level. So trying to use those words to frame it in that light rather than in a more negative light. It's learner-centered, outcome-oriented, support success, focuses on development, and those are all, positive things. It's based on, as we've said, observed performance on the data. And what it is, it's similar, if you think about it, it's really similar to debriefing. And I can imagine that some of you have had debriefing conversations, following a simulation or scenario with the learner, or perhaps you've been engaged yourself. And what you try and do in debriefing as a facilitator is unpack it for the learner and then engage them in sort of reconstructing what are some next steps. And in a similar way, that's what we want feedback and coaching to be. We want to lead the student in sort of deconstructing for themselves what was going on when they were talking to that patient, the things that they need to work on. Coaching, it's longitudinal, which is, wonderful for those of you, working in the LIC where you have that longer relationship and can hopefully build on it. And there's not time today, but at another time, I'd love to hear more about the kinds of relationships you develop with your learners and how you use those relationships. This is the quote at the end. It was from a program director when I was doing a workshop in residency education for for program directors. And again, it's another one that's always stuck with me. How can I help this learner be the best that they can be? And what she told the group, we were just talking about phrases that people use to try and get over some of that emotional stuff that gets in the way. And she said that what I say when I'm meeting with a learner, and I know, that maybe a learner who's struggling, or perhaps I have to share some, some feedback that they may not be pleased to hear, that I just remind them that my job is to help you be the best that you can be. And what I have to say may disappoint you. However, my job is to help you use it to improve, to make you the best that you can be. So again, that builds the relationship with the learner. It shows you have their best interest at heart. It shows that you want them to develop. So again, that's another phrase that's not mine. It's one I've learned from someone else. It's just stuck in my mind. So why are we separating these out? Some people, I think, just do it naturally, and I can imagine some of you do. That you're providing the feedback and then immediately, moving into how to use it. But what we've learned through the research that we've done is that coaching is a distinct skill, and I think you think of sports coaching or like a music teacher who observes and then gives feedback and observes and gives feedback. And it's really a distinct skill to be able to do that. I think in medicine, I don't think you'd argue with me that it's been more traditional, like to tell, not to coach. So just to tell someone, I'm the authority, you go do it this way, rather than working with the learner to try and sort of sort out where they are, what they think they need to do, and then to help them develop that plan. And again, in our research, clinical teachers told us that they didn't really feel comfortable coaching, that they were more used to telling, and so how to develop this skill. So again, that's where some of our work has come from. This is work from my colleague Chris Watling at Western University, and I love that the way he says this. Coaching requires a shift in philosophy. It isn't about the finite exercise of teaching something to someone, but rather about the infinite exercise of continuous improvement. And then he goes on to say the best athletes and musicians trust in the power of coaching to push them to be better than they imagined they ever could be. And so it just, again, it frames it in that very positive light. And I think that even though he talks about, continuous improvement, and those of you especially in the block rotations may only have a learner. Like I hear stories where a learner may only be with you for a day or a week. And so how to do coaching in that situation? I guess a way to do it is if we adopt the philosophy that, this learner is on a long trajectory. And if I can just provide some little bit of feedback and coaching that's going to get help for this day or for this week or whatever the time, and then encourage them to go on and seek further help from the rest of their mentors and supervisors. That it's more about that philosophy rather than being able to do it longitudinally oneself. Another resource, it's an article, Atul Gawande. If you haven't read it, it was the New Yorker 2011. I'm sure you can still find it. Personal best, top athletes and singers have coaches, should you? And he, as you may know, he's a surgeon in the States. He's also a writer, a researcher. And he was, coming back from his Saturday morning, coming back from his tennis lesson or something. And he was just reflecting and saying, oh, I've just had a tennis lesson. And he thought, my gosh, I've been in practice for 25 years as a surgeon. I've never had anyone watch me and give me feedback. Anyway, it's a dynamite article if you've got time to read it. I'm going to move on because time is moving on. So the feedback and coaching process that I'm going to share with you, relates to the R2C2 model. The first R is build the relationship, and then you observe, as we've talked about. Then you seek their reactions and reflections. Then you move on to the C's, which you agree on the priority content. and then the coaching. And there'll be some examples of phrases to use. And in this brochure that I mentioned that's on the website, there are more examples of phrases you can use. So this feedback model, we've actually, like, when I went back and thought, oh my gosh, the first paper we published, the first study was in 2015. And then we seem to have, it's quite a big team, and various members of the team have studied different aspects of it. And so the thing about it is that it is evidence-based. It's not just, well, we think it sounds like a good idea at the time, but there's been quite a body of research done on it. And so therefore we're fairly comfortable in sharing and encouraging folks to try it out. So the first R is build the relationship. The next one is explore reactions and reflections. The next one is confirm the content. And the final one is coach for change and co-create an action plan. We'll have to make that brighter. So what I'll do now, well, first of all, before, I'm sure you folks know this, before you sort of move into a feedback and coaching situation, that you really need to prepare the learner, and it's preparation for working with the learner, so that if someone's coming to you, and I'm sure it's easy in the LIC, to schedule a meeting and spend time orienting them and so forth. It's more difficult if you're only having someone in your clinic for a week or a day, as I hear happens, but trying to find that bit of time, trying to spend a little bit of time learning about them, their challenges, what they like about learning, and what they would want to learn from you. And then what I've learned a lot about is that third bolded bit is really important, sharing your expectations and approaches. And so sharing as their clinician educator, whether you're there for the year with them or whether it's just the day, whatever it may be. And this is something that another colleague has said, I like to observe something every day if I can, and have a feedback and coaching conversation about it. I believe in coaching, and I believe that everyone can improve, and including me. So I'll ask you for your feedback too. So you can see it's sort of leveling the playing ground. First of all, it's spelling out that this is what I expect. Another colleague has said, well, if I don't give learners feedback, they're paying all these huge amounts of money to learn. And if I don't provide them with feedback, they're not going to learn. So I'm jipping them. So in a similar way, this talks about, I like to observe every day so that they're not surprised. You set up a way, and then if you can develop a plan, and again, to the comment at the beginning about, how to find time, that, trying to find time, together, that's to set a time to observe, even if it's just for a few minutes, and then time for the feedback and coaching, which may not be right then. It may be at the end of the day. It may not be till the next day. It's a challenge, however, important to carry on with. So now going back to the R2C2 model, building the relationship. So your goal at this phase is to engage the learner, build relationship, and build that mutual respect and trust, because that's what makes it all work. So saying, this is the first time we've worked together. Do you have a goal for our time together? Is there something you're working on in particular? If you've seen them before, the last time we worked together, you were going to try out X. How did it go? What would you like me to observe today? So setting that expectation. What are you working on? Is it a particular difficult procedure, or is it a communication style, or what? So spending a bit of time on that, because as in any communication, it's based in relationship. And then observing and sharing those observations, setting aside time, even if it's just a small chunk. You don't have to observe a whole procedure, just a bit of it. Then asking the learner's observations first, and then sharing yours, which takes us into the second R, which is exploring the learner's reactions and reflections. So the goal here is to foster the learner's self-reflection, address their emotions, and begin to develop shared understanding of the experience. And again, you'll see the similarity to debriefing. So you want to gain their perspective. Well, how did that go for you? What went well? What were the challenges? So trying to get them to be specific, and then providing your perspective. Well, when I watched you doing X, I noticed such and such. can you tell me about that? So you're moving them into that reflection. You're not just giving them the feedback. Like I noticed that you were a bit tentative when you were asking the questions about sexual history. Can you tell me a bit about that? Or I thought you did X really well, but you seemed anxious when you were doing Y. What was going on in your head? So again, providing that observation and giving them the chance to respond back and give their view. So it's a two-way street. It's a conversation. And then enabling the learner to reflect upon and react to the preceptor's comments. Like, what do you think of my observations? Maybe I haven't got it right. Can you, so that you're engaging them in a conversation. And this, what people have, folks who have tried this out have said that it really helps with that emotional piece, that by just having a conversation about what they've observed, what the student has experienced, and then having a conversation and trying to sort out what the differences are and trying to agree. Third one is confirming the content, that what you've observed, and agreeing on a priority. So you want to enable the learner and you, both of you, to reach a shared understanding about the content and a consensus on one priority. Given, it's a busy clinical time, so just taking one thing out of that scenario for them to work on. That's sort of the consolidation stage. Is there anything that wasn't clear? Do you agree with what I've said? Am I missing something? Am I overlooking something? Confirming statements like, that's how I saw it as well. Do you have anything else to add? And then what you're trying to do is funnel it down to, so what is the thing to work on? Now that we've talked about it, what would be your goal? And then to summarize, I hear you saying you want to work on X. These are just examples. I'm sure some of you have your own phrases you use in these situations. And so then that really takes us to the coaching for change and this co-create, well, we use the term co-creating an action plan, which just means it's not the preceptor telling the student what to do, or it's not the student saying, I'm going to go off and do this. It's doing it together and making sure that, that both agree. This is, I'm afraid it's pretty small. I apologize for that. If you go to the website and find the brochure, you'll be able to read it a bit better. To ensure the learner and preceptor agree on the goals and create an achievable plan. So thinking of that scenario that I gave at the beginning, where the student wasn't, seemed to be leaving early and perhaps wasn't completing their reports. So what would be the goal for that student, and what might they need to do in order to be more timely and in order to be able to complete their reports? Like what will you do to achieve this? When the steps under number 2 are all, like, just think of it. Whenever we develop a plan, these are the kinds of questions we should ask. What will you have to do? What's going to get in your way? So it's almost like motivational interviewing. What's going to get in your way? Like if you're going on a diet, what's going to get in your way of staying on the diet? So what's going to get in the way? Maybe it's family at home that's requiring that student to leave early. Maybe it's something they can't control, but finding out what might get in the way. What resources will you need? Who will be able to help you? Who are you working with next? Will you be able to work on it then, especially if you're in a block rotation and moving on? And when will you begin? So that you're trying to get a very specific plan. And what I've heard faculty say, that once they sort of get into the rhythm of this, it doesn't take a long time. It's like any new skill. When you're first learning it, it can feel quite cumbersome. But then once we've all done it a few times, it comes easier and more naturally. And then the final important thing is determining follow-up. Who are you following up with? Like if it's longitudinal, we can follow up. Let's check back in on this next week, and let's see if you've been able to make any of the changes that you want. Whereas if you're in a block rotation, then it's really relying on the student to identify who their preceptor is going to be on the next rotation, and will they tell that preceptor that this is something that I need to work on and I really need the help of that new preceptor. And then how will you know that you're successful? So it's more challenging, certainly, in the block rotations. And in the study that we did with residents and using the R2C2, I think across the board, they said no one has ever followed up with us. You know, we may have said, well, I need to work on this and improve. And they said, we've never had anyone follow up. And so it just heightened for us how important this follow-up phase is. So in summary, the feedback really cultivates that insight into the current performance, and then the coaching promotes improved future performance. And thinking back to the R2C2, really, when you think about it, you can't coach if you don't have a relationship. One can't coach if you don't encourage the learner to reflect and think for themselves. Can't coach if you don't agree on the content and what's the important thing. So really, in a way, all those phases of the R2C2, really are phases of coaching, with the fourth one being the very specific steps, that the how to set a goal, and then how to try and hone out what the student or the learner is going to do to meet those steps. And again, that's the feedback and coaching model: build relationship, explore reactions and reflections, confirm the content, and then coach. And I think we have a couple of minutes. So if you have a quick question, I'm happy to entertain it. And moreover, I'd really appreciate you to fill out the evaluation, which is in the chat there somewhere. I think Angela can point it out to us. There it is. Because as Angela said, and I said at the beginning, that this is the first time we've sort of tried these, shorter sessions at noontime to, just try and give a quick overview. What would be helpful? Give me some feedback. What would you have liked to have heard or done that you didn't do? And then for the second session, what would be your ideas? I think our ideas are that we would have some scenarios. I have a couple more scenarios that we might even actually sort of try out. I can be the student, or I can be the preceptor, or whatever, and we can sort of try out, some of these phrases and so forth. The other thing that we're going to have will be some short videos that you can watch and critique and see if they're helpful to you and how you might change them and so forth. Because with coaching being a skill, it's something that we have to practice. So just hearing me talk may not necessarily help you with improvement. Hopefully it provides a foundation. And so having a bit of opportunity to practice or to see some videos might be helpful. So thank you very much. I do look forward to your feedback. Please be honest and specific and helpful, and hope to see you again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.